Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this fantastic webinar that we've got planned for you today. Let me just share my screen while people are starting to come in. I'll give people a couple of minutes to join us, and then I will introduce our esteemed guest, Gerry. So welcome to the Connected Citizen series. This is the fifth in our series, entitled Less is More, with the esteemed Gerry McGovern, who, as I said, I'll introduce shortly. While people are coming in, I'll just go through the agenda very quickly, do a little bit of housekeeping. Then I'll introduce and hand over to Gerry to give us his talk on digital waste and top tasks. That'll last for around 40 minutes, and then we will have questions at the end. I would encourage you to throw your questions into the chat box as we're going through the session. I'll pick them up with my colleague Eamon, and we will ask them to Gerry at the end of the session. As usual, this session will be recorded, and we'll make it available to registrants afterwards. Just a little bit of context before we start. So the Connected Citizen webinar series we've been running it largely for our public sector and local government clients over the last 6 or 7 months. The recordings of the previous sessions are all available, and we've got some coming up. And the idea is that we bring thought leaders and experts, subject matter experts in some area that lends itself towards digital transformation. And they give us an hour of their expertise and ideas, and we discuss them, which is what we'll do shortly with Gerry. Normally, we run it around our framework for digital maturity. So we've got the kind of the 6 sections down the side there. To date, we've always been pretty specific. We think that each section, needs to work together. So digital is like a jigsaw piece. You've got to do the strategy, you got to do the customer experience, you got to do the technology. All these pieces together obviously help and lend themselves towards digital transformation. Today's session with Gerry is probably a little bit broader, but we couldn't forego the opportunity, Gerry, to get you on the case. We're delighted to have you. It's a real honor to have you. Before I get you talking and we have a chat, I'll just kind of go through your bio very, very quickly. I think people have probably read it already, but you've been described as an internet visionary. And as I was saying, I was reading your stuff back in 95, 96, back in Ireland in the Wild West days when the internet was starting off. Your top tasks methodology, which you'll talk about today, has been used by hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations around the world, and top organizations such as Microsoft, Toyota, etc. And dozens, if not hundreds, of governments around the world. You've spoken in 40 countries, you tell me. You've been featured on BBC, CNN, and many other television outlets, and of course you've got six books that you've written, and I know a lot of people who are on this call of this webinar have read your books, as have plenty of my team. So as I said, it's a broad topic. I think it's pretty topical here in Australia, Gerry. We've just had an election, so your digital waste stuff, we've had an election that we've had an electorate that really are calling for change on the climate, and the new government has pledged to do so. So really kind of interested in your thoughts on it, you challenging us on being better. So thanks for joining us, and how are you, I suppose?
Thanks for inviting me, Fergal. Yeah, I'm in the process of moving. We're moving house, and it's 7 o'clock on a very nice Irish summer morning. A heat wave is on the way. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but maybe it's a portent of things to come that we are facing with this whole climate change. So I'll just share my screen and we'll get going.
Wonderful.
Okay, thank you. So welcome everyone. Basically, in 1970, we were extracting from the earth somewhere in the region of 25 to 30 billion tons of material. So every year, in the year 1970, about 25 to 30 billion tons of material. By 2020, it had gone up to 100 billion tons of material. So what you're seeing is it's clouding out, or it's blackening Mount Everest. And Mount Everest, they estimate the mass of Mount Everest is about 150 billion tons of material. So by 2020, every year we were extracting or digging or mining from the earth 100 billion tons, which had gone up from about 25 to 30 billion tons in 1970. And it's estimated that by 2050, if things keep going the way they're going, we'll be extracting 170 billion tons of material. Now, it really doesn't matter about any sort of, CO2 or otherwise. This isn't sustainable. We can't dig up a Mount Everest every year and hope that we have a survivable planet within 100 years' time. It's really not remotely sustainable. So we have gone as a species, and it all really took off in the 1970s, from consuming the earth to devouring the earth. We are certainly at this stage extraordinarily bad ancestors, and we are literally devouring the planet with our massive over consumption. So something needs to change, and change radically. And this idea that green technology, green technology is driving the mining. It takes 4 to 6 times more materials or minerals or metals to create an electric car than a traditional car. So you might get efficiency over its lifetime in its consumption of fuel, but the actual initial impact is absolutely enormous of electronics and electrical devices. 90% of what we mine from the earth, at least 90%, is waste. And when it comes to electronics, it's 99% and sometimes 99.9%, because electronics are much more demanding. So our laptops, our desktops, our smartphones, they've a high level of purity demanded in their manufacturing. And to get purity in the end product material, you usually create a lot of waste and a lot of energy impact in the manufacturing process. So they say that to create these silicon ingots, which are the basic silicon material from which you will create the silicon chips, that a scientist was telling me, to create the purity required in those silicon ingots, it's like with Tic Tacs. I don't know if you know about Tic Tacs. They're small little mints that are, smaller than the size of of a nail. He said it's like lining up Tic Tacs from the west coast of the United States to the east coast of the United States, and only one Tic Tac can be impure in that entire line. So to actually create that level of purity, the amount of energy, the amount of water required in creating silicon chips, absolutely enormous. Water, energy, other resources and materials. So we're creating a fantastic, enormous quantity of waste, and it's all accelerating. And we talk about the circular economy, but the economies are actually becoming more linear, not circular. We may be talking about the circular economy, but we are still living in a waste, an absolutely waste-driven economy. When it comes to CO2, and we all know the damage of CO2 and how it warms the atmosphere and many other things. The modern human species is about 300,000 years old. So the amount of CO2 that humans are responsible for, the modern human species are responsible for, we had caused about 25% of it by 1975. So from 300,000 years ago to 1975, we had created about 25% of it. And between 1975 and 1995, we created another 25%. So we created as much CO2 between 1975 and 1995 as we had created between 300,000 BC and 1975. And between 1995 and 2020, we had created another 50%. So we are in exponential growth, and humans just don't understand exponential growth, but it is extraordinarily dangerous type of doubling growth that as the numbers get bigger, the doubling of them become incredibly threatening in the process. So really since the 70s, which is interestingly when the computer technology industry took off, we have absolutely become massive consumers and producers of huge, unbelievable quantities of utterly unsustainable waste in every sense. So looking technologically, and we can look at a macro level, we can look at it, there's big Facebook data centers in Ireland that are consuming massive quantities of electricity and enormous quantities of water. But what is the data for? Well, the data is for Facebook Facebook is the #1 advertiser in the world to sell us stuff we don't really need. So in many ways, technology has been the accelerator of the consumerist, the devouring society. But the devices themselves are also a big, serious impact on the climate. To create one smartphone, to create the metals in one smartphone. So a typical smartphone is about 160 grams of material, somewhere in that territory. And about 80 to 100 grams will be mined materials, the aluminium or the iron or the lithium or the various. There's something like 55 materials in a smartphone. Extraordinary number of materials in a smartphone. But it's about 90 kg of stones, gravel, tailings, slag. And most of this, so to get 100 grams of useful material, we create 90 kg of waste, and most of that ends up in what are called tailing lakes, toxic dumps that will be toxic for tens of thousands of years in the process. So it's 90 kg of stones and gravel and 60 kg of CO2. Most of the impact of electronics, particularly consumer electronics, is in the manufacturing. So typically in a typical environment, in recharging your battery over a 12-month period, you'll be responsible for somewhere between 3 to 5 or 6 kg of CO2. 60 kg of CO2 has already occurred in the manufacturing. So before you've even used the machine, it has on huge impact, because as I said, the need for high purity, etc., means that the electronics manufacturing process is extremely energy and resource and material intense. So if you're going to take anything out of this, either as an individual or as a manager within the government sector or otherwise, it's hold on to these devices. They have a huge negative impact in their manufacturing process. And the fact that we're changing them every 2 or 3 years is horrific. It's absolutely horrific. We have 15 billion smartphones made since 2007. Consider the impact of that on resources and materials, and the long-term impact as well. The vast majority of those that get to their end of life are not recycled. They are dumped. They are like mini nuclear power plants that will poison the soil and the water over tens of thousands of years, because they are full. Something like 16 of the 17 rare earth materials can be found in your smartphone. Mercuries and all leads and all sorts of negative materials and plastics. 20% or so of many smartphones are plastics, and plastics have huge long-term negative impacts on the climate as well, because they never disappear. They just get smaller and smaller until they get to a level of microplastics where we will be breeding them. Our children will be breeding them in much greater quantities and drinking them and eating them in the fish, etc. in the process. So the waste environment, absolutely huge. So hold on to the devices as long as possible. So 15 billion smartphones since 2007. That's just the manufacturing wise. That's 900 million tons of CO2, 1.35 billion tons of material, and 204 billion tons of water. It takes 140,000 liters of water to make one smartphone. 14,000 liters of water. It takes 190,000 liters of water to make a desktop. 14,000, which is still an enormous quantity of actual water in the process. A desktop or a laptop is about 1,200 kg of stones, gravel, tailings, and slag, and 300 kg of CO2 in the manufacturing process. So the core lesson, hold on to the devices as long as possible. Get them repaired. If you've any sort of involvement in IT and commissioning, buy repairable devices. Demand much longer warranties. Become part of the right to repair movement. We need to shift from this linear, produce, sell, consume, and then dump, to where we, are recycling materials through, and we're holding on and we're fixing and repairing our devices. So looking at the basic life cycles of how long should various devices last to be in any way sustainable, so to speak, to create the least negative impact. We always have some sort of a negative impact, but the least negative impact on the climate. So with vacuum cleaners, it's about 11 years. And they estimate in actual, we're keeping them for about 6.5 years. So there's 4.5 years that we're missing out. Washing machines in 2011, 17 years. We were holding on to them for 10 years. We should have been holding on to them for 17 years. Washing machines in 2021 is down to 6 years. So it's getting worse. It's not getting better. And the reason is that the 2021 washing machines are full of chips and digital electronics, and digital is brittle. Digital is impermanent. Digital breaks much easier than analog or other such devices. So in many ways, the less digital we use, I'm not against using digital in appropriate ways, but we overuse digital. And digital is not a good thing to be depending on when you've got a climate crisis and you're going to be hit with floods and huge heat waves. Digital devices are very brittle devices. They're not long-term stable devices. So laptops, 20 years. We should be holding on to our laptops for 20 years. We're holding on to them for 4.5 years. We should be holding on to our phones for 10 years. We're holding on to them for 2 to 3 years in the process. So if there's one thing coming out of this, hold on to your devices as long as possible. So what is driving a lot of these devices is data and the actual explosion and growth in data. By 2010, it was estimated we had created 2 zettabytes of data. So a zettabyte of data, it's hard to imagine how big a zettabyte of data is. Basically, I calculated that if you printed out a zettabyte of data, you'd need paper. The amount of paper that you'd need to cut down 20 trillion trees to get enough paper to print out 1 zettabyte of data. Now, there are only 3.5 trillion trees left on the planet, so it's not feasible. So it gives you a sense of how big a zettabyte of data is. So by 2015, 12, 33, 64, 2025, 180, by 2030, 612, by 2035, over 2,000 zettabytes of data. These are utterly unsustainable. Utterly, we cannot keep going at this pace in the quantity of data we are creating. 28% annual growth rate, and 90% of it is crap. In fact, more than 90%. I've seen studies which show that only 5% of data is actively managed 3 months after it is stored. So be very careful. This cloud is on the ground. These are massive, massive, massive data centers, the size of 10, 20 football fields, full of servers that caused between 1 and 2 ton. A typical computer server can be responsible for between 1 and 2 ton of CO2 during the manufacturing process. And they're often replaced after 2 or 3 years to buy the latest versions. So, you know, be careful with our data. Clean up, do an audit. The vast majority of environments, data is totally unnecessary in it and could be cleaned up and actually deleted. So cut the crap. Hold on to your devices as long as possible and cut the crap either in your own computer or work for a big cleanup to remove all that. Because I guarantee if you really look at what you're storing, huge quantities of it is wholly and absolutely unnecessary to actually store. And every byte that you store has a negative impact on the climate. Looking at the web a little bit, our own particular profession, web page size, an average web page size in 205 was 0.4 of a megabyte. By 2010, it gone to 0.7. By 2015, around 2. And now, you know, somewhere in the region of 4 megabyte, depending on what analysis you actually look at. So this is just the weight of the actual pages. We can design perfectly good web pages in a couple of 100 kilobytes, but we don't, out of laziness and developer convenience and putting on stupid images that, you know, cliched smiling faces. Images have a big negative impact, and the amount of crap images that are on so many websites that nobody wants and nobody needs in the process, but organizations feel we need a silly, stupid person smiling out at people to make us look professional in the process. No, you don't, particularly with people accessing a lot of these services now over mobile devices. I don't know how Australia behaved in relation to COVID-19 in the health environments, but most health websites went to text. You know, whether it was NHS or whether it was the Irish Health Service or the Canadian Health Service, when they were delivering the COVID information, they didn't have pictures of people blowing their nose. They had basically, here's how you get, you know, here's the place you go to get the vaccine, or here's what the symptoms are. Text can be extraordinarily powerful if it's done properly and done well. It's not that we should have no images, but images have a significant weight impact and are often useless cliche images. So get rid of the stupid cliche images as well. In the typical web page weight, HTML represents about 3%, CSS about 5%, fonts, you know, all these custom fonts, that's 7%, a lot for fonts. You don't need custom fonts in the vast majority of situations. JavaScript, 25%. So most pages don't even need JavaScript in the process. You might have it in your Symfony 3 database, but you can publish to static pages because most environments don't change. Their pages don't change. So we could create much lighter pages. JavaScript has a particular negative because it's not simply its weight, it's the processing it causes on the device that it arrives on that has a significant energy impact. And images representing about 60% of the overall weight. But this picture totally changes if you add video to the environment. Then you're looking, video is representing somewhere like 80% of internet traffic at the moment. And again, so It's not saying don't use video, but be very careful when you using video, because it is a huge impact. It has a huge energy impact. It has a huge weight impact. And people say, oh, yeah, but it's just a megabyte, it's just 10 megabytes. It doesn't really matter in the pro. Yeah, well, you know, all these just 10 megabytes. In Ireland, data centers are consuming 14% of our electricity at the moment. And they want to double. They want to build twice as many data centers. Data centers in Ireland are consuming more electricity than all of rural Ireland. And this is just the electricity. A typical data center can consume 1 million liters of water every single day. Not to mention the devices, which, as I've said, is where most of the waste and the impact. The servers, 1 to 2 millions of servers, 1 to 2 tons of CO2 to manufacture each one of those servers in the process. So these data centers have a massive impact, but it's just 1 megabyte here, just one. That's how we get to these huge data centers full of dumpy, crappy content in the process. So we really need to see that digital has a weight, and digital is physical. And this idea that we can publish as much as we want without any consequence is how we've got to this crisis point for humanity, that we don't think of the implications of what we are actually doing. We're very intelligent today, but we're not very wise in the process. JavaScript. 2011, 52 on average, 52 kilobytes. By 2022, 500. And the vast majority, whether it's JavaScript or CSS, is not used. In one study, 37% of mobile pages JavaScript were unused. That was equivalent to 80 petabytes a month, or 54,000 metric tons of CO2 every month for unused JavaScript in the process. Go through your code, strip out the stuff that is not useful, make the page, everything on the page that's connected with it actually needs to be used. So that's the equivalent of having to plant 37 million trees to deal with that JavaScript waste. JavaScript, most pages, as I said, don't even need it. The maximum budget should be 350 kilobyte for any page environment. So looking at all sorts of areas where we could simplify. I did this test and I looked at doing 1,000 words of text in HTML, and the weight of it was 39 kilobytes. That was the total weight. And I did the exact same 1,000 words in a PDF, and it was 141 kilobytes. In many situations, PDFs are horrible to begin with anyway. PDFs are generally a horrible publishing method, but they're in many, many situations heavier. The best way, the lightest communication form is well-written HTML. Well-written HTML is the lightest way to actually communicate in the process. So that's, if you're interested in these issues, I brought out a book a couple of years ago called Worldwide Waste. You can read it for free on my website, and also buy it if you're interested. So I'd also like to talk a little bit about the top tasks method. So the top task is something I've developed over 20 years or so. It's a research method. It's a survey-based research method that is focused on answering 2 questions: what matters and what doesn't matter in a process. So it begins with developing a list of all the things that could be important within an environment, and then getting your citizens or your customers or your users to vote and say, well, here are the most important things to me, and then really focusing on those most important things. So back in 2009, we did it for Liverpool City. And this was the top task that actually came out. You can see this is there was 1,800 people. You usually need about 400 people to vote, but you can see that yellow is the first 25% of the vote. How stable it was. If you're seeing lots of fluctuations in colors, you'd say, oh, we need to get more voters. But basically, you could have stopped at 400, and typically you can. And the top task had emerged. And what were they? Leisure activities, waste and refuge, museums, libraries, bins, entertainment. And these tasks, I've done maybe 50 or 100 top tasks for municipalities. It's the same stuff coming up, whether you're in Australia, whether you're in Ireland, whether you're in the UK, whether you're in Canada or whatever. So I just looked at that recently, those 2009 data at their current actual website. And you see, it's the same stuff, basically, bins and recycling. This on the right is the little screen grabs from their current website, schools and learning. So if you get your top tasks right, you won't need to change your architecture, because bins need to be taken out. They needed to be taken out in 2009. They'll need to be taken out in 2022. They'll need to be taken out in 2032 as well. People have children that need to go to school. You get the core tasks right. You don't need to be changing your structure. You'll have a basic structure that will last over time. And even here, if you scroll down the page, you see leisure and well-being. So most of the top tasks on the left are still around on the homepage architecture, 10, 15 years later in the process. So do top tasks well, and you have a stable structure that you can use year in, year out in the process, and council tax there as well. So when Liverpool were doing this initial project back in 2009, they did a content mapping activity, and they looked at who was publishing what. And they found there was an inverse relationship to the top tasks. So the more important the tasks were to the citizen, the less Liverpool was publishing on them. And the less important they were to the citizen, the more Liverpool content publishers were publishing on them. And there's a basic reason for this, and it's ego and it's vanity in the vast majority of situations. I sometimes say when a tiny task goes to sleep at night, it dreams of being a top task, and it wakes up in the morning full of energy and gusto and saying, if only I could get on the homepage, if only I could publish more content, people would read me more. No, they won't. They're not interested in you now. They'll never be interested in you, no matter how much content you publish. You're just going to annoy people and clutter the website. But that's the journey of the tiny task. Publish, publish, publish in the process. So they found that 200 of the 4,000 pages accounted for 85% of the traffic. We all know this, but we just publish in the process. So massive all policies, documents, and these can go in archives or go in other places in the process. Don't use the website as some sort of dumping ground for everything and anything, and we got to publish this because of freedom of information, blah 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 blah. That's not a good excuse to create a huge mountain of crap that's actually helping destroy the planet in the process. The role of communications. Sometimes I say giving a website to a communicator is like giving a pub to an alcoholic. It's happy days initially and everyone's having a great crack, but it's publish, and then a couple of years later you end up in an AA meeting and saying, hi, I'm Gerry, I've got a 5,000 page website. I used to have a 500 page website, but I'd no self-control. It was just publish. Can we get away from these terrible activities of publish, buy in the process? So all of this content that they were publishing in communications represented 2% of traffic visits, and 10 news items accounted for 64% of that 2%, and all of those 10 items were service alerts of there's roadworks here, the school is closed, etc. Functional stuff that people really needed to know. So we're not, as organizations, nearly as important as we'd like to think we are. And our citizens out there are not waking up in the morning saying, I wonder what's the council news this morning. I can't wait to go to the website and read it over my coffee and toast in the process. Not alone had they far too many pages, but they had all this convoluted crap on their site about explaining, you know, people want to find the local childcare centres, but instead they're getting War and Peace on the childcare centres. What we do, the Liverpool Childcare Development Team, provides advice, training and support in the following areas. Of course, we're not going to give you links to those areas. It's like a murder mystery. You're going to have to find them now and scroll down and how a work is done. Nobody cares about this sort of stuff. Please get rid of it. You'll be doing the climate, you'll be doing the environment a service, and you will be absolutely doing your citizens a service. Just get straight to the point. Cut the crap, get straight to the point, focus on the top task. So all of this blah, 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 blah. So they got rid of all that. One of the impacts, they went from 4,000 pages down to 700 pages in the process, 22% reduction in call volumes, 400% increase in online reporting. They just got 4 complaints from the entire city of Liverpool, and lots of complaints of where's my tiny task content from staff. But in fact, most staff didn't even know their content had disappeared in the process. So that's what the philosophy of top tasks is about. It's focused on what really matters and make that better and get rid of the tiny tasks in the process. So back in 2009, they had this classification structure. And on the left, this was a government mandated classification that came out in 2001 or 2002, somewhere around that. And it didn't work. It was very clunky, but stuff that doesn't work, do we get rid of it? No, we add another system onto it. You know, that system is useless. Let's buy a new system, and we won't get rid of the old system, you know, but we keep the two running together. So this classification isn't working. Will we get rid of it? You know, because people, it's easy to hire people to add stuff to your website. What you really need is people who have the wisdom to be able to take the stuff away. No, they don't add, but they add a most popular. So what's the stuff on the left? Unpopular in the process. Imagine calling a classification, navigation, most popular. You're really going to, the other links are going to have to go into therapy. They're saying, why am I not popular in the process? You shouldn't be there in the first place if you're not popular, or you should be deeper down the architecture. And then we've this do it online. I mean, what's the other stuff? Do it offline in the process. This was another marketing initiative from central government around 2004. But people put it up on their website, and then they were afraid to take it off. And Liverpool were saying, but Manchester has it. And Manchester were saying, but Liverpool has it, you know, in the process. We can't take this down. Then you'd My Neighborhood. You think, oh, can I find a library in my neighborhood? No, this is a very specialist thing called My Neighborhood in the process. And then you've benefits advice in coming through. So what good is this? Nobody could find anything on this convoluted, complicated page. So they've gone to a much more simplified, streamlined, top task type of architecture, a single architecture, nearly always better. A single presentation of the classification is nearly always better than bits here and bits there and bits all over the place. So top task, in summary, begins with identifying process by which you go through to rigorously agree, and that involves a vote of your citizens to vote on what's most important to them. And often that results in a review or redesign of the classification around a singular classification based on the top task. And then in an ideal world, you are measuring these. This is what I call the task performance indicator. You're asking instructions like, you know, when is the bin collection, or for special large materials, or how find a number, or find a form that you would apply to you know, get hazardous materials collected. So you're constantly testing these actual tasks with real people, and you're improving based on increasing success rate and reducing time on task. So there's basically a book I published in, I think, 2018 at this stage, which is a real how-to manual on how to do the top task if you're interested in it. It's been done in lots of municipalities over the years. I'd say somewhere between 50 and 100 in the process. But really focus on what matters, and going back to the worldwide waste, hold on to those devices. Go to your IT department if you can and say, we don't want to change. How do we get repairable stuff? We got to get movement on this, that we look after our digital devices much longer than we are currently looking after, and cut the crap when it comes to data. Really go for a cleanup. One habit that I've got into over the years is that when I go into a folder looking for stuff, I also look for something to delete. I say, well, what can I delete in this folder? And I nearly always find something I can actually delete, as well as me wanting to retrieve something. Thanks for listening, and we're open to questions or comments further.
Wonderful, Gerry. That was a whirlwind you took us through there. My mind's spinning on just the exponential nature of this. I guess we all know that digital waste was growing, but when it's spelt out to us, I think it's frightening. I guess, look, I'm happy to take questions as people just put them into the chat box, and I'll pick them up. Just to start out, Gerry, let's start with the digital waste. What organizations are addressing this and doing a good job of it? And are there any kind of lessons that we can learn, and links we can, places we can send people who are thinking, right, we need to do something about this?
Well, I think that, Fergal, there's a good movement, and I know they're in Australia. I follow one or two about right to repair.
Yeah.
I think it's extremely important that we shift this model away from planned obsolescence to a much more repairable movement. So if anybody is on the call who's anyway technical, or to get involved in or set up a local right to repair movement. I was talking to a scientist there last week. I was interviewing Josh Lebowski, is his name. He's a Canadian. He does a lot of work on materials manufacturing for the electronics industry. And he was saying that, I was asked him at the end, I said, what's the most important thing that can happen that could bring about positive change in our society? And he said, individual action is unfortunately practically pointless. On our own, yeah, it's good for ourselves, but it really won't have any impact. But citizen action, he says, he's also a historian, he says, any of the big social positive changes in society actually occurred from citizen action, whether it was the right to vote or healthcare or car safety, etc. He said, back in the 50s, the car industry was a mafia, an oligarchy. And they certainly had no intention of introducing seatbelts or car safety. Car safety was driven by citizen action. And he said, we need to regain that sense of citizen action, because the changes will not occur at a government level, and they will certainly not occur at a corporate level. Government will only change if the citizens are driving that change. So we need to get together into those local groups, whether they're right to repair groups or, set up, even there's 4 or 5 of the content, and you go to the IT department. It's much more powerful than just one of you. We need to organize around this. So, I think the biggest one that I can see at the moment is the right to repair movement.
I just wonder, Gerry, and look, I'm throwing it out there. I think it's a little bit like social media to me, that we've adopted this technology so quickly that our social norms haven't kind of caught up. There seems to be a lag where we all need the latest device, or we want the latest phone, but because the implications aren't right in front of our eyes, we don't take it seriously enough, I think. I don't know if you agree with that, or
no, totally fair.
Yeah.
I think that's a core psychological issue. But they did this study with children, 10 to 12-year-old children. They said, draw the internet in the process. And they all drew like little birds for Twitter or whatever. They all drew symbols. None of them drew computers or big data centers. Everything had become symbolized. In other words, disassociated from the physical.
Yeah.
In the process. So even though people say, but it's digital, you know, people don't see the device in their hands. That thing that you're holding, that has 55 materials in it.
Yeah.
You know, that thing that you're holding that weighs 160 grams caused 90 kg of stone to be dug up. And most of that stone and gravel and other material ends up in these horrible tailing, what are called tailing lakes. And I'm sure some people in Australia are aware of these huge tailing. Most of them are sludgy, and they will be toxic because to get a lot of the raw materials, chemicals are being used, washed. They're being washed with various chemicals. So these tailing lakes, nothing will grow on them for 100,000 years. And in many cases, accidents are occurring because they're badly designed. They're hugely damaging. So this to create these devices, and I want to keep them as well, because you know I'm an addict as well. Like I don't want to get rid of my phone. I don't want to get rid of my laptop because I want so much from that I get. Maybe I shouldn't, but that's the way I am. But to really look after these things because they've had a huge impact on the planet to actually create them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that occurred to me as I was listening to you was that, you know, I think your top tasks is all about the customer telling us what they want on our websites. The digital waste to me seems like this, you know, there's a massive role for government basically to start educating at a deeper level the customer and saying, you know, we're recording this session, we're going to put this up as a video, which is fair enough. But people are demanding things as videos these days when maybe they don't need them and pure HTML can suffice.
Totally. Like I've done loads of testing with engineers, with network engineers over the years who did a lot of work with Cisco for 10, 15 years. And in the vast majority of situations, what the network engineer wants is the troubleshooting manual or the installation manual. They do not want videos. You know, so there's a huge number of areas where videos is unnecessary and actually contrary, you know, to being useful. The vast majority of videos are only looked at for the first 30 seconds. So there's huge question marks over these things. Are they actually any use? And so much of them are not. We need to really measure usefulness. And sometimes a video will be really powerful, you know, and really necessary in the process. But in a lot of situations, text will be not just lighter, but better.
Yeah. And of course, video should be short and succinct where it can be. Good question here from Lorraine Toy, who's a fellow Irish woman. Lorraine asks, how many IT departments are tracking their environmental costs? Or have you observed that, Gerry? You're seeing it around the world? Very
little. All of this is incredibly new. I saw a study recently just in data center managers that almost 70% weren't even tracking their water usage. You know, and water is a huge impact in data centers because they need a huge amount of water for cooling because they create so much heat in their actual, you know, the servers do. The vast majority of IT departments are not even remotely thinking about these issues. We need massive wake-up calls in the process. So it's a long journey, but so much of this is a long journey. But we have to start somewhere.
Absolutely, no doubt about it. I want to just jump to top tasks, Gerry, and I've obviously been following it for many years. I was showing you the stranger's long neck, which I give to my team here. In general, are people doing a better job now with top tasks, or are we not learning? You know, are we observing, like councils? To me, they seem to have better websites now than they had.
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago. Is that a fair thing to say or not?
Yeah,
Do you disagree?
I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, certainly from what I've seen in the councils, there's been real progress. I mean, it was a real challenge 15 years ago to even convince that, you know, oh no, we need to publish everything, and you know, even the idea that people had tasks, you know, that was hard. It was hard. Oh no, they're just looking for information. Why are they looking for information? They want to do something. You know, the idea that actually people come to your website to do something was a real struggle to explain back, and it's much less now. You know, and I think you indicate you're finding that as well. So there's real progress, but structure, you know, taking the results and classification. I don't know so much in council, but councils and municipalities, but I do notice that there's almost less emphasis on architecture today than there was 20 years ago. Not that there was a huge amount 20 years ago, but that there's this blind belief that, you know, the search engine will do it, or the AI will do it. But good classification design is even more important in high data environments. But, you know, we need a return to basics. But generally, I'd agree with you. Yeah, certainly in the council's environment, I have definitely seen a lot of improvement.
So how do we deal? I'll throw this question out there because we see it all the time. How do you deal with the in terms of the change itself? And have you got any tips for you know, someone who's running top tasks and a senior leader comes in and says, I don't care, I need this on the homepage? Because we do see that happening all the time. Or you see, you know, the councillors coming in and demanding to have something shown. I think that's a real challenge for comms people and IT people.
Yeah. And it's funny, isn't it, Fergal? This is the exact same challenge that was in 1996, and it'll be in 2046. We claim that we changed so much, but the basic stuff, the basic ego, the basic, you know, me first and get my stuff up there has not changed. So, you know, the best way that I have found to deal with that is by showing people, well, well, we agree these are the top tasks, right? So these are stuff that people really need to do. And then to try and get some evidence, some usability testing. Well, here's what it's like for them to do it right now. You know, so get the conversations towards the top task. So rather than getting into the conversation space of the tiny task, preempt that and say, hey, we've got a crisis in our top task. What are we going? People, 50% of people can't find this. So that the energy is taking up thinking about the most important stuff rather than allowing them to set the conversation with, I want this. Because then they've got to respond to that and say, you know, well, how do we improve the success rate of that? And oftentimes you improve the success rate by cleaning up the homepage and by saying, well, there's too much stuff on the homepage. Look, they're scrolling around the homepage, or they can't find anything, or, you know, wherever the problem is often caused in the journey by tiny task content. And to actually improve the success rate of top tasks often involves removing or hiding or taking away tiny task stuff. So establishing those top tasks and then getting agreement within the organization. Yes, these are the critical things that people need to do. And then getting some sort of a measure of how they're performing. And then focusing the conversation around improving that performance.
The other question I think on that comes to mind is the simplicity of top tasks. And, you know, you've got a whole industry now around UX that really should be simplifying things. And it's kind of that user experience and design that there still seems to me to be a bit of a tension between both, where, you know, your design agency will want to make stuff look pretty at the expense of user experience, even though they call it user experience. I don't know what your opinions are, whether you think I'm wrong there, or
No, no.
would you agree with me?
Yeah, well, but I mean, design agencies are still advertising-y or brochureware. A lot of them, they just rebranded themselves,
Yeah,
but they're not really in the space of user experience or good user design. So it's all show stuff, or an awful lot of it is show and vanity, and that's how they make money.
yeah,
That so it's a real challenge, to get to that level of simplicity, because it is a different skill set,
yeah,
and it takes away work and business from other people who do big flashy things. So that we're constantly dealing with that challenge. I mean, imagine letting a design agency develop COVID, information environments. There would be no, with the pandemic would last another 4 years in the process. I mean, but focusing on what truly matters, that it's a different culture.
yeah,
So we're at that constant challenge of, no, I want to make it flashy, I want to make it look cool, etc. It's the same existential challenge we've had in 25 years. And it's not that something shouldn't look nice and elegant, but this vain type of design, brochureware, we're still doing a huge amount of brochureware design 25 years later.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. We've got some smaller councils and smaller businesses who are on listening to us today, Gerry. I know you've done some stuff, or I think you've done some stuff with the UK.gov, and of course we have the DTA here who publish standards and things like that. So a lot of your thought processes to me seem to be built into that around, they don't call it top tasks, but it's, simplification and putting the things that matter up front. Are they standards that you think, people can just leverage without having to go through and spend the expense of
Totally.
redoing everything themselves?
Absolutely. I think gov.uk are a tremendous model, and the standards that come out of them. And not just that is it good, but it's good for the environment, because one of the key environmental, future policies should be reuse. And it's not just reuse of materials, but reuse of code, reuse of, standards, reuse of designs, reuse.
Yeah.
There's a substantial amount of energy goes into creating stuff that could be saved if we reused it. So reuse is a wonderful model. It's environmentally friendly, and it generally delivers a better product as well, rather than trying to invent this from scratch. So, reuse, and all the council websites should look the same, basically, because they all do the same things. So what will differentiate you is, the uniqueness of your city, but the fact that you've, a bin collection in schools and etc. Like, we should have a common architecture, because humans are the same wherever they're living.
Yeah, look, we're big advocates on open source, open standards, sharing code, collaborating, all that kind of stuff. And there's still, it happens a little bit in the sector here, but I think it can still, there's massive scope to share a lot more.
Yeah, absolutely. Open source is a kind of a very much sustainable philosophy.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, look, we're just on the hour, Gerry. I just want to say, number one, thanks a million for giving. I know it's early in the morning there, so thanks a million for giving up your time and preparing this great session for us. In terms of people who want to find you, gerrymcgovern.com. We will put a survey out to people. So if you fill the survey, we'll give away 5 of Gerry's books. I'll get them on Amazon and post them to people. So I think they'll be well worth a read. I'm going to try and get that digital waste one myself. I haven't read that one. So look, thanks again. Really appreciate your time. Gerry, you've done this, you haven't asked for payment for this. You've asked us to donate to an environmental cause in lieu of paying you, which we'll do. And if you've got send me a link if you've got a preferred charity, and I'll send it on to the rest of the listeners today as well.
Thanks, Fergal, and thanks for organising this. And if anyone on the call, spread the word if you believe, if you impact, because we really need to get the word out about these issues. The vast majority of people have no idea of the impacts of the digital industry. Final
question, Gerry. I know you used to travel to Australia quite regularly. Have you any plans to come down here?
Probably not. I've really cut back on my travel because, the impact of travel. So maybe, but it's unlikely, if I did, it would have to be a really big trip or something to make use of it in the process. But yeah, I had some lovely times there, and was all over Australia doing workshops and talks and seeing the beautiful country, extraordinary continent. But no plans anytime soon.
No problem. Well, if you're down, let us know. And if you're running workshops, and we'll circulate it to the listeners and to the group and the community as well. So look, thanks a million. Appreciate everybody staying on, and look forward to keeping in touch, Gerry.
Okay, thanks, Fergal.
Thank you.
Bye now.